My name is Jeff Gunderson, and I work in the library here and have been here for 36 years. So, and my office was always next to the archive. So, consequently, this is sort of stuff that I always dealt with for many, many, many years. And it was always my pleasure to be around Fred Martin since I arrived here. And so when Hessie McGraw and Katie and the gallery people and others decided to do this show on redoing the archives, the ghosts of the tower, we figured it'd be good to bring in people who knew some of those ghosts intimately, and
the ghosts themselves, yeah.
And the ghosts themselves, so we can always they're here somewhere, but and some of them are buried in those boxes, or a little paper trail of them all. So we thought it'd be great to have people who dealt with the exhibitions history of this place, which goes back to the 19th century. And we had, a couple months ago, we had Phil Linares speak about the time that he was here. And now we're going to have Fred Martin, who was his predecessor. Fred was a student at University of California, Berkeley, where his fellow students included, and maybe we're almost limited to, Sam Francis and Jay DeFeo. Were there any others?
Of course there were.
Oh, okay. I thought it wasn't as a select program as I had thought it was.
Certainly not.
Oh, okay.
They were all smart too.
And but he did venture across the bay to take some courses here. He studied with, among others, he studied with Clifford Still here. He studied with David Park. And he studied with Mark Rothko during one of the summers that Mark Rothko was here to teach, if not both. And he became attached to this place probably through that and his friends that he met at that time, including Linda Connor. And and Jack Fulton, who just walked in, and Bruce McGaw, who's here, and many others. And he became attached through probably, now maybe you need to elaborate on this, the Artist Council, Artist Committee, Artist Exhibitions Committee in the 1950s, and became sort of the de facto gallery director, if they called you such a thing, or exhibitions coordinator. No? Art Bank, just
no
poobah.
Directors.
Guru?
No directors.
Okay. And this
administrators.
Administrators in the 1950s through the 1960s, when he became director of the entire place from the 60s to the 70s. Then he came back to teach for a while, and he came back again to be dean for a while, and then he taught up until just very recently. So welcome Fred Martin to his old haunts here as part of the Ghosts of the Tower series to give a presentation.
Wow. So I have to stand up. No. I like standing, see. All those times I taught art history for so many, I always stood up. You don't have to. And I'm going to do it again. So, and this is blank because I'm not ready to start yet. It's really on. And when I push the right button, it will say the Art Bank, because that's what I'm here to talk about. So the Art Bank was a project of the San Francisco Art Association. Now, am I speaking loudly enough?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Now, so what was the Art Association? Now, it's kind of important to know this. It's long gone. This whole thing I'm going to talk about no longer exists. And I'm going to try to give you why I think it doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean that's the reason, of course. Anyway, now I do have to read my notes a little bit, because I spent so much time writing them last night, I better read them just for the hell of it. I owe it to the notes. Anyway, it was the way we did things then. A project of the San Francisco Art Association. The way we did it then. Now that is the, in New York, the National Academy of Design in the 1850s. I think that was the 1850s. Might have been a little earlier and a little later. Now the building was designed to remember Venice. I mean, why the hell do that? Anyway, that's what they did. In every age, we do these things which later ages think are really pretty stupid. But anyway, they wanted to remember Venice. Venice had great artists, and certainly the National Academy of Design is going to be great artists. It's a self-selecting group of artists. Good ones pick more good ones, but they don't pick bad ones. Well, wait till later, when the next bunch thinks the first bunch was bad. Anyway, right now, it still exists. I didn't put their new building in here. Go to New York, you'll see it. Now it's the National Academy Museum and School. There was a school there in the beginning, a school there now. And alumni of us, of SFAI, have taught there. Deborah Remington taught there. And I believe Sonia Gektoff taught there. Deborah got me into a show there. Got me a prize there.
You got your own prize.
No. And then when I asked her how I can become a member, she changed the subject and told me to shut up. Don't ask those questions. Anyway, that's when it was looked like when it was started by artists to show their work in order to find clients who might buy this stuff. That's what it was all about. An annual exhibition. Come in. There's the opening. And look and see. Get the artist's name, and then get referred to the artist's studio, where us people, us artists, we turn on our sales powers, and we fix the studio up to look really impressive, and then we sell you stuff. That's the way we did it. And we learned how to do it because we learned it from Paris. That's the way they did it. That was the model, the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, annual juried exhibition, so that artists could show their work and find clients. That was the art support system, the way it worked. Worked in Paris, we're going to do it in New York, and then soon enough, but not quite soon enough, we're going to do it in San Francisco. The story is that somewhere in that corner where the alleyway goes, on the ground floor is a fish market, and on the upper floor, that's us. That's the San Francisco Art Association. That's where we have our shows. That's where we connect to our clients. That's why we're there. Now, pretty soon, we start an art school. We get some plaster casts. You can't have an art school without plaster casts. In fact, that's what it is. It's copying plaster casts. Greek sculpture is the ideal, therefore learn it. Do it. So that's what we taught. After, I don't remember how many years, not too many, we moved up to the top of Nob Hill. Some years later, we inherited a mansion, the Mark Hopkins Mansion. There were the big four that built the railroad, east to west. Mark was one, made giant money, built the mansion. Well, his wife, and they needed an interior decorator, like, what are you going to do with all this thing? So she had an interior decorator, and they decorated and did this and that. And there's an organ, as you went in, there was, as I remember, there's an organ at the top of the stairs there. And you could use this for exhibition space, maybe. Well, in due course, Mark dies, and his wife marries the interior decorator. Well, you know, when your beloved dies, it is a shock, and you're looking for love, and well, there he was. Well, then she died. And well, he went off to Maine with his chauffeur and left the building to the University of California for us, and it became the San Francisco Art Association. Very good. So we continue our thing. We had the shows juried by a jury, the same system, the same social structure by which the art world operated. Shows juried by a jury, selected by the artist members of the San Francisco Art Association. Now, the Art Association had two kinds of memberships. It had artists, and it had patrons, collectors, whatevers, arty types. The artists' members had been in 3 juried annuals. That's how you got to be an artist member. And they would pick the jury for the annual, not unlike, I guess, the way it was done in Paris. So they would pick the jury, and then there would be the annual, and be the same system. And it was working pretty good, except then there was the fire and earthquake, and then everything went smashed. Supposedly, at least, that's a view of our place. That came to be. Well, we rebuilt. That would be our exhibition space. And down below there were the stables, where we'd have the school anyway. The stables survived. They didn't all fall down or burn up. So there we were. So I'm going to say we, us, now, we're part of it. They're us, we're them. We've been going along like this, just clawing, and they had to claw too. Reading back some of the notes I saw, that was supposed to have been worth 2.5 or whatever million. I mean, this is in 1890. Well, the insurance, when it was all done, would only produce, I don't know, a couple $100,000. So we scramble and trouble and managed to build a thing. So there we were, rebuilt with a museum on the ground floor, our school in the basement, The Art Association's still going. By the way, I'm going to hit on the word we again. The students, the teachers, we're all us. Yeah, the teachers have one role, the students have another, but we're just locked on each other. You know, it's like this. Furthermore, sure, we run the school to support ourselves, us artists do. The students come to learn so they can do it too. We're all in the thing together. Anyway, it wasn't until the mid-1930s when the museum separated with its own building. Down there at Civic Center, the Veterans Memorial, the top floor, became the San Francisco Museum of Art instead of that one. But it was still host to the annual exhibitions. Every year, painting and sculpture, that's the big one. And every year, drawing and prints, that's the little one. But every year. That's the way we connect to our clients, the people who want art. They come to the show, they look, decide, get in touch with the artist. Still host of the annual exhibition with the jury selected by the artist members of the San Francisco Art Association. Okay, so that goes on that way until the 1950s. And so to the Art Bank. Those are the catalogs of the Art Bank. 1958, 59, 60, 62, 63, what happened to 61? Well, I don't know, don't worry. And 64, 66. Now, for myself, my own job, it was to produce that, and work with Tony Jalap to produce that and that. But that one, I mean, I didn't type it, but I sure as hell did everything else. So, and what was it for? Because it is a new twist on the annual exhibition. Because it's there all the time. The Art Bank of the San Francisco Art Association, of which this catalog is the first of a projected, I'm just reading out of the catalog, first of a projected annual series, has been set up with the kind assistance of the Rockefeller Foundation. Now, just by the way, the SFAA, San Francisco Art Association Board, in those days, if I remember correctly, and I think I do, was 18 members, of which 6 were artist members. 12, quote, lay members. The lay members are supposed to raise the money. The artist members are supposed to know about art. Well, Nell Sinton was one of the artist members. And she had a friend who was a key person at the Rockefeller Foundation. So the network works, and we got the money to start the Art Bank. To pay me a salary of, I think it was $5,000 a year, maybe 6, and to print the catalog. Not only print, you know, make the photographs through the whole thing. And it had that many people in it. truth is, it had most of the artists, the established artists, who'd been in 3 annuals of the Bay Area and of California, north and south, including some from Oregon and Washington. It was West Coast art. So, and we had this index because as soon as you start to put a book together, well, what's going to look good with what? Well, so what we did was to have an index so you could look anybody up, but in the meantime, we made the pages so that they sort of go together instead of violently not. There would be a photo, the artist with a brief biography, including an address, if the artist wanted it. Remember, we're still connecting artists to purchasers. Now, to read for the catalog introduction a little more. The Art Bank is a collection of current work by artist members of the San Francisco Art Association. It is a project in education intended to foster an understanding of the artists of the Western United States and their accomplishments. The introduction continues. The Art Bank includes work by most of the professional fine artists of the San Francisco Bay Area, in conjunction with work by a scattering of painters and sculptors from areas up and down the coast. These artists are professional in their devotion and contribution to the cause of art in our time, its development, quality, and meaning for the community. The originators of this plan hope that through it, its catalog, its traveling shows, and introduction service may come a wider appreciation. Well, the catalog was made up from the 1958 San Francisco Art Association Artist Members Exhibition held at the Legion of Honor. The Legion of Honor didn't do that anymore either. Now, so in the catalog, a photograph of each work of an artist and a biography. Biographies compiled from information supplied by the artist. Copies of the catalog have been sent to all major museums, libraries, colleges, universities in the United States. The association hopes that museum directors and curators will find the catalog useful in organizing group exhibitions of American art and in seeking out new artists for one-person shows. We know that critics will discover in the catalog valuable background material on the artists whom they're called upon to discuss, and context material useful in assessing overall themes and developments in the art of today. We hope also that the patrons and collectors will find the catalog stimulating and revealing the possibilities for their search for new facets of acquisition. Now, I was the administrator of the Art Bank. Now, we did have work by all those people and it's hard to believe. If you go in the Diego Rivera Gallery, if you go in the mailroom, it was all in there. The office of the Art Bank was there, and all the paintings and everything was stuffed in there. And I would show work to everybody. One of the more memorable moments was when Jim Elliott, who at that time was curator for the LA County Museum, and I think it was Walter Hopps was Ferris, but on his way to Timonil in Texas, they came, and I made them look at every goddamn thing around the, I took it all out, all the way around the Diego, and made them look at every one. And they said, do we have to look at all that? Well, just all you need to do is glance, but you give each one a glance and see if you find anything. That's why we're here. Well, then, of course, we did the traveling shows. And going on reading from the catalog, traveling shows have been composed of the material illustrated in the catalog, with certain changes caused by the necessities of transport. Now, I do remember when we were putting stuff in crates, and Carlos Villa was putting it in, and there was a lot of controversy about he was just tossing it. Okay, yeah, I know. Anyway, we did the best we could. Sure, we're all amateurs, but we did the best we could. Being made available to museums, schools, and libraries throughout the country. Each show organized around a central theme or stylistic development. Exhibitions tailored especially to the needs of smaller museums, schools, designed to provide material of high quality, cultural significance at a minimum of cost. Yeah, and they were cheap, $150, $175. Copies of the brochure outlining these exhibitions being mailed with the catalog, so we would mail those. Each year, this would be on the inside cover, so you know what you're about to look at. Exhibition Committee of the Artists Association prepares, with the advice and assistance of the Institute Director of Exhibitions, by now we had a director, series of touring shows designed to survey the work of association members. What we really were was a giant art gallery, a giant commercial art gallery, putting together touring shows of 150 people. Copies of the brochure outlining the mailed with the catalog each year puts a touring exhibition. Some of these exhibitions are prepared to present specific themes. Others to survey in broad outline a major style or attitude. Current in the work of members. This catalog presents 6 new exhibitions, that particular one did, plus 4 holdovers from the year before. So this is what we did. And we did it full time, 5 days a week, 9 to 5. And by the way, when you're putting up a show, you're going to be there until it's up. I don't care what time it is. That's what it is. I had learned that when I was working at the Oakland Museum before, you know. And you better get in here tomorrow morning and clean the damn place up, too. So, a major style or attitude current in the work of members. Well, so that was it. It's what we did. We had an introduction service, like I did with, you know, Jim Elliott and with Dorothy Miller from the Museum of Modern Art, with the guy from the Whitney, because we decided instead of picking our local artists for jurors, we could get attention out of New York by inviting a New York curator to jury the show. So we did that. I would take them to meet any artist they wanted to meet, which I did do. And if they didn't mention somebody that I thought gave good lunches, we went there anyway. So that's why we went to Jay DeFeo's. And Jay got in the 15 American show because of good lunches and because of the work she was making. So, introduction service, established in the office of the Art Bank so that visitors to San Francisco Bay Area may obtain a comprehensive understanding of the art produced. Examples of the work of all artists represented in the catalog, available for viewing. Complete biographies of artists on file. All works deposited at the bank will be available for loan to qualified institutions. For this reason, museum directors and curators find the Art Bank an invaluable aid in making selections for survey exhibitions. So that's what we did. And the Art Bank administrator will facilitate studio visits for persons wishing a closer acquaintance with the work of individual artists. We'll be happy to make personal introductions whenever they are desired. So that is what we did. We did that from 1958 to about 1964. Now then, where did it all go? Because it did. It was like turning a switch. What had been the art support system? How had it changed? The art support system. That phrase continues to bug me terribly. If you've never heard it, pretend you didn't. But I'm going to say it about 6 times in the next 6 minutes. The director of the San Francisco Museum of Art taught me that phrase, and who was in it? It was he who talked the museum's board into changing its name to San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. That's how SF-MoMA came to be. Before it was just SFMA, San Francisco Museum of Art. Okay, the art support system. Curators, critics, dealers, collectors. Notice there aren't any artists, but that's because these people are supporting the artists. Other times they're called the gatekeepers. Their thing is to shut us out. Pick the ones they want. Now, their choices, some of them are for the future, some of them are what can be sold today. Either way, the art support system, they do squeeze the us out. They make the decisions, we don't. And of the 1950s, early 1960s curators and critics, well, there were only 3 curators in San Francisco. One was at the Legion, one was at the De Young, and I knew her quite well, Ninfa Valvo, and one at the San Francisco Museum of Art, John Humphreys. He would go to artist studios. You won't catch a curator in your studio nowadays. And as for critics, remember the art support system, curators, critics. As for critics, there were only 3 critics. One for the San Francisco Chronicle, one for the San Francisco Examiner, and one for the Oakland Tribune. That was it. 3 newspapers, 1 critic each. My impression of them, and I did meet them frequently enough, to know what they thought of each other, which was no. Anything you like, I don't. Having met myself trapped in that twice, as an artist trapped in that. If Alfred Frankenstein liked me, then Alf Reed from the Examiner didn't and told me so. Anyway, for dealers, this is in those 50s years, there were, as far as I remember, Gump's, which was mainly Asian antiquities. And I used to go there and buy stuff. I bought a wonderful bowl there as a wedding present for myself and my wife when we got married. And then there was Raymond and Raymond, which, as I remember, sold prints of paintings. Not etchings, no, prints of paintings. For collectors, well, there were almost none. So the art support system, certainly for us, left us mostly out. Thus it was. Then the art bank was the support system for artists. That's what we did. That's why we were there. That's why the artists invented us. And its catalog, touring shows, were the curators and critics for art in the Bay Area and, in effect, the West Coast. By the mid-1960s, however, all that had begun to change. The galleries came, and the annual exhibitions went. Bill did, I think, the last one. By 1967 or so, the art bank itself was gone. So, as some perhaps too personal history of the art bank, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. You leave me with a few questions, though, and probably lots of details. And the last one that I wrote down reminded me, because that world does change in the 1960s, and particularly in San Francisco, when you were talking about those critics and writers. How does Art Forum, which is invented in San Francisco, change that dynamic? And how did the Art Bank relate to Art Forum?
So Art Forum did start in San Francisco. I didn't mention John Copeland's. John could persuade people. And Philip Lederer, was that his name? What?
Yep.
No. What was his name? Not Lederer, but Leader, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, Philip Leader. He was kind of an editor-ish. Anyway, John convinced Philip that, San Francisco's a dumb, is a loser place. Move to L.A. So it was moved to Los Angeles. In due course, it was moved to New York because John was he wanted to go to New York anyway, so let's move it to New York. So it moved to New York, and now it's in London, I think. Isn't that where the official publishing place is?
I thought it was in New York still, but it's not in San Francisco anymore?
No. I even wrote a piece or two for it when it was in San Francisco.
I know you did. And they covered a lot of local artists in those early couple years.
Well, never mind them. It goes to where the money is. There were collectors in L.A., more than here, so it goes there. In fact, I was having an intense discussion with someone else recently about this support system. Fact is, without the Medicis, Michelangelo would never have been. That was the support system at that moment. What's the support? I'm sorry, but it is cash. And we need it. And especially because when at the same time, a lot of us, we have an aesthetic which comes down that says, you know, express yourself. You're not making Chevrolets, you're making it to say what you wish to say. You're not making it for a mass market. Well, we just get so bounced, at least I do, bounce back and forth. I don't know what I'm doing sometimes. And all of us, throughout this whole thing, we do have an aesthetic, and have had one, I think, ever since the end of the 18th century and Romanticism. We're all romantic heroes and heroines, but at the same time, damn it, we got to sell this stuff. How can we be both at the same time? I have no idea.
Phil.
Fred, I don't think I succeeded you because you were director of the college by '67. So
Well, I became director of the college in '65.
Oh, so you were running the art. Well, Jim Monty had succeeded you.
Yeah, right, yes.
And then I succeeded Jim Monty, but at the time there was still the remnants of the art head.
Yeah, the stuff was lying around in the tower, I
And we were
think.
still sending things out to college and university galleries.
So the shows were still traveling then.
Yeah, some of the shows
That's
were still
good.
traveling.
Yeah.
And there was one case, I think we took a show from a commercial gallery called West Coast Plastics or something of the sort. And a graduate student who will remain nameless was packing the box, and he looked at one piece and said, "I hate this damn thing." And he smashed it to powder.
Wow.
That's probably the end of the program. And the annuals, what happened to the annuals?
The museums wouldn't do it anymore.
Well, you know,
Remember when you tried that last?
well, I presided over the 100th, 1971.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we had 8 jurors. And we had all of the works, something like 17,000 works at the Fort Mason. And we had, I think, David Corn and Walter Hops were painting. And Maurice Tuckman from LA County Museum, and Carl Andre for sculpture.
And this is one who accepted everything.
And yes, and we had prominent jurors all around, but Tuckman and Andre couldn't meet at the same time. So Tuckman came in one day, made his selections. Andre came the next day and said he couldn't judge anybody's work but his own, so he pronounced everything in. And the deal was that anything that was accepted had to be shipped back by the Art Institute, and the Young Museum was going to take the sculpture. And so there was a lot of consternation, and we had a press conference and decided only to show Tuckman's work, but to include all the names of the sculptors in the catalog. And the artist community was up in arms. They said that Carl Andre only wanted to come for the trip and the honorarium and so on and so forth, but that wasn't true. Carl Andre gave back the check. Secondly, he created 2 works of art, and he gave them to me, and he said, if you want to raise money for your program, just send them to my dealer, and she'll sell them and send you the money. Well, I presented the 2 Carl Andre sculptures to the artist committee, and they turned it down. And I kept those sculptures for year after year, and every now and then when a new crop would come in, I'd submit them again. They'd never take them. And finally, some years ago, I gave them to Dr. Shimshak, who was, I think, the chairman of the board, and he took them to Paula Cooper, and Carl dismissed them, wouldn't bring them anyway. And that's the last I saw. But there were other annuals. I remember another time, the annual was held here, and Howard Freed was the head of the annual, and he wanted, the annual consisted of maybe it was the Adeline Kendall one, $4,000 bills on the wall. Completely empty gallery, but $4,000 bills on the wall and a security guard. That might have been the demise of the annual.
Well, they did have annuals after that, but they were thematic shows that were organized by the artist committee and through around 2006.
Did the other museums ever cooperate?
No.
How did the artist committee get started?
The artist committee did get started in 1871. It was known as, I think, as the Exhibitions Committee at that time, but there was always a committee of artists who organized those annual shows that began in the 1870s.
It was the Artist Council.
Artist Council.
It's the one I remember in the 50s.
Did you have interaction with what was originally the Neely Sullivan Awards and then the Adeline Kent Awards as the exhibitions connection?
You're asking me?
Yeah. Well, I could ask Phil.
Fred and
In some remote way that I don't really remember. It was just sort of bureaucratic machinery moving along.
Because as somebody who has access to this paper trail, I see your correspondence through there, and more than once you had to run interference for artists, particularly Bruce Conner, in a couple different things, where he had an Adeline Kent Award. The other thing I came across today in going through things which I didn't know about was a thing, and I can't believe you'll remember this, but in 1960, there was a collections seminar that you organized with Paul Mills, Ralph Ducasse, a person named James Ackerman who taught art history at Berkeley, Nathan Oliveira, and Bruce Conner. And it was about exactly what you said about the art bank, where there was a day-long panel of people talking about people collecting art. And so you consistently did these things, not just with the art bank and the shows, but I think with seminars and panels as well.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. And that story is true about Dorothy Miller and the lunchtime thing with Jay DeFeo and how that's interesting. I thought that might be I thought that was probably folklore, but.
No, it's true.
Wow.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Jay DeFeo, so did you bring people regularly to Jay DeFeo's apartment on Fillmore Street to see Death Rose and the Rose as it was working, as she was working on it?
Not regularly, no, it would depend.
But you did bring people
Oh,
there?
yeah.
And people were going in and out of the apartment?
Uh-huh.
So she wasn't, in other words, isolated?
No, not at all.
I didn't think so.
No, not at all. She also was working with the Sixth Gallery. She kind of kept track of everything at the Sixth Gallery, which was at about that same time period.
Fred, you are mentioned in Walter Hopp's new book. It just came out. It's called The Dream Colony.
The what?
It's called The Dream Colony. It just came out. Walter wasn't much for writing, but he tape recorded a lot of his thoughts, and some friends of his have put it to conversation like Flanders. And he talks a lot about the Ferris Gallery, but he mentions you and a lot of San Francisco artists, Jay and Wally and others who had some interaction. Do you remember dealing with Walter?
Yeah, but not in depth at all, but yes, I do, sure. Because the Ferris was the LA gallery that, connected to the kind of stuff we were doing here.
Well, remember Jim Newman is also
Yes,
connected
completely.
not before us.
Yeah.
That was Jim. Very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
There seemed to be lots of crossover with all these artists. With Ferris Gallery, with Hassel Smith shows in both of those places as well. He's in the Art Bank as well as in Ferris. Cliff still is. I think Lobdell maybe is, and Jay of course, and others. I found this stuff to be very interesting as this primary source when the Diebenkorn Foundation was trying to track down every nuance of Diebenkorn's paintings and where they might have been shown, because Diebenkorn was part of the art bank. And it was interesting to follow all those traveling shows, and there were a lot of them every year. They traveled all sorts of places, and in the documents you could see how they were shipped from one place to another, but they were shipped to the University of Iowa to be shown at their gallery. But there seemed to be this very much interest in what was going on in California, what was going on the West Coast in the early 1960s, and that they wanted to show in the East Coast and in the Midwest.
Well, now our job is to convince them of that again.
Yeah. Well, you did a good job of it. Are there other questions that people have?
Just a small point of order. Fred, you installed exhibitions in the Diego Rivera Gallery, did you?
Yeah.
How did you deal with concrete walls?
We had either plywood, we covered the concrete, and we could nail stuff on. I don't remember what we used, but it,
Because I remember hammering concrete nails into the wall and it had an opening. A glassed and framed piece fell at the foot of the chairman's floor.
You have great memories.
one always remembers those.
Yes.
Mr. Martin, I was a student here in the 80s, but can you tell me, if you could, what your favorite decade teaching here was and being involved with the Art Institute, and why? Your favorite decade, and why? You know.
No, I have to think. This is, what I'm going to say, I'm not going to go see the young show of the Summer of Love, but I was the, I guess the title at that moment was Director of Academic Affairs, or whatever the title was. I liked that time a lot because, especially, the beatniks are back and it's much better too. I mean, so that's the way I felt. Yeah, it was hell. It was really hard. We had 1,000 students for a while. I mean, it was, sure, academically it was, especially administratively, nonetheless, it was alive.
What can we learn from that now? From that period, your favorite decade? What can we learn as faculty and students and administrators from that period that you were excited about?
Help the freaks.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's totally different.
Yeah.
Never remember. Help the freaks.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. Good.
Well, thank you very much for everybody for coming.
Now
And
that I had to work. Hey, thank you.
And this show will be up for a while longer, and there's interesting stuff buried in there for anybody to prowl around and ask about. So please have your questions ready, and Fred will be around a little bit to answer some more questions too.
I think it's a great idea you're doing this.
Yeah.
Ah.
Terrific. And great to see you. Thank you.
At least we do have Mr. Gunderson.